7:01. So, good evening. And before we get this started, I just wanted to review some housekeeping items regarding our meeting tonight. Committee members, please mute your microphones following roll call until it is your turn to speak and keep them muted. To indicate you have a question or comment, please use the raise hand function in Zoom and Chair Miller or I will announce you before you speak. Please unraise your hand when you no longer have a question. If you have not been addressed, but you've raised your hand, just please ask a question and then pause and wait to be acknowledged if we've missed you. A friendly reminder that all action items for this evening's meeting will be by roll call vote. For members of the public who are joining us via teleconference, if you'd like to speak during the public comment period, please use the raise hand function in Zoom on the bottom of your screens, and Chair Miller or I will announce you before you speak. For members of the public joining only by phone, please send any public comments to me at my email address, which is listed on the agenda, and I will read your comments into the record. Alternatively, if you're joining through Zoom by phone only, you can dial *9 and that will alert us that you have raised your hand and we can call on you in that fashion. And if any board members or members of the public at any time experience technical difficulties during this meeting, please email me and I'll do my best to resolve. For any directors who get dropped from this meeting, just please add yourself back in if that's possible. And that concludes my comments, so I will kick it off to Chair Miller.
Yeah, and my comment is two things that I've observed in Zoom meetings. It's easier to talk longer than you want, and it's an awkward situation for all of us. So we're going to do the best that we can to conduct efficient and successful meetings and include public input. But as the chair, I ask your forgiveness and that you each bear with me as we fumble through this to try and make the meeting effective. So with that, I believe Yvonne has just joined us, but I think we are going to call the meeting to order. And as was noted, all of the meetings will have to be done as a roll call vote. So I am going to turn it over to our clerk. We'll get a roll call for who's here.
Yes, thank you. So on your screens, you'll see there is a roll call slide, and this will be the order in which I will call your names this evening. I'll start with our chair, Chair Miller.
Here.
Vice Chair Smith.
Here.
Gibbons.
Here.
Sinks.
Here.
Fliger.
Here.
Tyson.
Here.
Rennie.
Here.
Montano.
Here.
Elahi.
Here.
Thank you. Martinez Beltran.
I'm sorry, here, I was muted.
No worries, thank you. And Abe Koga?
Here.
Thank you. Absent, I'll note our Director Ellenberg and Director Tovar.
Okay, great. So at this point, we are going to be doing a closed session, but before we go there, I need to ask, is there any member of the public that wishes to speak on one of the closed session items? Now, I'm not seeing any hands raised. I got to double check with those behind the scenes. We see no members of the public that wish to speak on this, correct?
Correct. No.
I do need to make an announcement as to why we're going to close session.
Yes, please, Greg.
So we are going to close session regarding anticipated litigation, and there are two groups of items we'll be discussing, and altogether 3 cases. The first one involves to discuss the potential early termination of the Duran Mesa PPA. And the second item this evening in closed session, we'll be discussing in closed session the legal consequences of one of the parties to our PPAs invoking a force majeure due to the COVID-19 crisis.
So the logistics for the closed session are a little bit different than if we were all meeting together. So we are going to have to kick all the attendees off of the meeting. And I would ask that everybody show back up at 7:25, and we won't proceed with the official meeting until 7:25. It means that we're on a time limit in the closed session, but we couldn't figure out a better way to do this. So at this point, I'm not 100% sure, but I think now is the point where we take all the attendees out of the meeting.
Okay, so Nix or Andrea are going to be locking the meeting now.
Yes, thank you. We'll just give folks a minute to leave the meeting room.
Okay, my view is that we are now just panelists, so Barring somebody accidentally showing up in the attendee list, I think we are.
Excuse me, Tovar is absent. Flagger,
Yes.
Tyson,
Yes.
Rennie,
Yes.
Montano.
Point, we've gone to 7:26. 7:25 was our official return time. And 5 attendees have showed up, 7 attendees, 8 attendees. So hopefully we have most of the attendees back, and we're all back. So I think at this point, I think we're going to continue on. And so first off, we just concluded a closed session, and I have nothing to report out. Next up, as you look at the agenda for the rest of the evening, this is the point where we will have public comment on any matter not on the agenda. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak on something not on the agenda? I am seeing none. Let me just double check with our clerk that she too has got no comment from members of the public on non-agendized items.
That is correct. I did not receive any email comments either.
Okay, next up then is our consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar can be acted on in one motion. I want to make a quick comment. The executive committee report was put onto the consent calendar, and so are the other committees, but they didn't happen this last time, just for expediency. And so I did review the report that was put into our packet for the executive committee, and it is complete and accurate. And with that, I will go to any questions or comments or motion on the consent calendar. Start with Liz.
I move consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, who was the second for that?
I was.
Okay, Vaughn was our second. And then Nancy, you have questions or comments?
I was gonna second, but I see it's not working that way.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I just procedure-wise, it's hard to know if somebody has a question or if it was a second. So maybe we'll leave seconds as the Wild West, just unmute and go for it.
Right.
If you want to make the motion, raise your hand, and I'll just try and pick somebody different every time because it's impossible for me to tell whose hand went up. Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Let me ask, is there any member of the public that wishes to make a comment on an item that is on the consent calendar? If you're on the phone, it would be *9. Otherwise, you can raise your hand. And I am seeing none. Let me check with the clerk. Is there any member of the public that you're aware of that wishes to comment on the consent calendar?
No comments received.
Okay, so nobody from the public. It doesn't look like there's any more discussion from us as a board. So let me ask you to call the question, please.
Thank you. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith,
Yes.
Gibbons,
Yes.
Sinks,
Aye.
Flagger,
Yes.
Tyson,
Yes.
Rennie,
Aye.
Montano, Montano.
Aye.
Thank you. Elahi,
Javed, your mic is still muted.
Somebody's muting me, I guess.
okay, we hear you. Can I have your vote, please, on consent? Elahi,
Aye.
thank you. Martinez Beltran,
Yes.
Abekoga,
Aye.
thank you. That motion carries.
Okay, excellent. Thank you guys for bearing with that. And as for the magic on the mute, if there starts to be noise on the line, We are doing muting everybody. So before you get back to the point of speaking, you pretty much should double check that you need to unmute yourself. Okay, so we're going to move right along. The regular calendar items, number 2 is our CEO report.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the board. I'm going to dispense with the usual update on legislative and regulatory and have you ask me questions on the written report that has been provided you. And we have reports on the decarbonization plan and account services too. What I would like to talk to you about is very high level framing the big picture issues related to COVID. First, our employees. We all want to express our appreciation and gratitude to the board for the support that you have provided us and continue to provide us. It's very important, especially when we are, all of us are in this difficult situation, and the support that you have provided is very much appreciated. Morale is very high and people are adapting very well. I am actually amazed at the productivity that staff has exhibited. It's like nothing slowed down. If anything, people are working even more intensely. And that's because, so it's been a very remarkable several weeks. And and you have, thank you also for approving just on the consent calendar, an expansion of one of the benefits for our employees that will help us get through this shelter in place process. So the big picture is coming into COVID, before we had COVID, we had updated you about the headwinds we are facing. Not only did we have the typical headwinds of PG&E and regulatory risk, but this exit fee called the PCIA was expected to go up by 70% in 2 phases, 20% right now, and towards the end of the year, it was going to go up close to 80%. So that was already facing us in addition to all the regulatory risk. And that was an issue as we were talking to the credit rating agencies, and we brought it up to you too. So that's where we were heading into COVID. Now, what COVID has overlaid on all this is we are going into an economy-wide recession. It is, just reading the papers and reading the Wall Street Journal, et cetera, the comparisons to the Great Recession of 2007 or the Great Depression of the 20s are the comparisons that are being used. Now, we don't know how this is going to unfold, but we do know there's a lot of uncertainty in front of us. And for an agency such as us, a key strength to navigate this uncertainty is the financial strength that we have. Fortunately, due to the board's actions over the last 3 years, we are in a very strong financial position. And what this financial position allows us to do is to, for now, keep our mission of decarbonization and 100% carbon-free portfolio. We can still move forward with that mission. At the same time, we also have the resources to help our customers in a meaningful manner and also help our communities, not just on COVID, but we all are aware that we have the public safety power shutoffs or PSPS events that are expected this coming summer. So we had it last summer. With COVID, it's just that the outcomes just seem to be, it could be much worse than if we just had PSPS by itself. No one really knows the answer on how to navigate this, but the key thing is financial strength and adaptability. In what I've seen here, it's staff adaptability, board adaptability. Looking at what the signs are, and then figuring out, okay, what can we do to maintain our decarbonization mission and still keeping ourselves a viable entity. So I'll give you a statistic that we have looked at our demand. We have our residential demand has gone up due to the shelter in place. However, the commercial demand has gone down, and that's the large industrial and commercial demand has gone down. We are projecting essentially a 10% revenue loss through the end of this fiscal year. And for next year, we are projecting a 3% reduction in our overall load. We think load will pick up. We're still guessing. We are looking at data right now, but we are also looking at the 2000.com load changes and the financial crisis load changes in coming up with these estimates. So as we go through this, we will keep you informed. I think we are in a good place right now, but the best way to provide support for our customers, support for the workforce as they come back into the workforce, and maintain our decarb status is to be financially strong. And you're going to see that theme through some of the items in front of you today. And it's essentially shifted the way in which we are looking at our portfolio and our future. So we'll be talking about this a lot more in each month. We'll be discussing this with the Risk Oversight Committee and also with the Executive Committee. So we will keep you informed, get your input, and adapt accordingly to continue to prosecute our mission. That's all I have in the CEO report. I'm open for questions on what I said or on the written reports.
Yeah, Girish, let me just ask a quick question. So it's really not business as usual. And the question that I will continue to have is, has the board given you enough authority to successfully execute our mission, considering that the board may be a little farther away from you than we're used to, since this is going to be an awkward situation for months to come?
Yeah, I think you definitely have. I think a central thing is how we support staff. That is super important because we have staff just like all of you at home. It's a very different environment. We have staff who are working with children, who have to educate them at the same time they're working on this. So they're taking on roles that they typically don't take on. And just like all of you, it's just very, and that's why you're providing great support. We are constantly asking our employees, are there ways in which we can adapt how we are assisting and keeping you in good shape? So far, so good. So you've been great. The board's been really, really good in supporting us. I think month to month, as we go forward, if there's anything that comes up, I will bring it up with you, Chair Miller, and the Exec Committee and the board.
Okay, excellent. On behalf of the whole board, let me just say thank you to every single person on the staff. These are complex times, and there's nothing that we could have done and that anybody can do to have prepared for what we are facing right now. There's a lot of burdens, including emotional burdens, on everybody, and I appreciate what everybody in the organization has been doing to help keep us running. And I'm sure the whole board would share those sentiments. So I have a couple people that have questions. I'm going to start with Carmen, and then I'm going to go to Yvonne. So Carmen?
Okay, thank you. So I'm just curious, you mentioned that in the residential demand that has gone up, and then the commercial demand has gone down, has decreased. So we have a 10% revenue loss. So which one is the one that's causing that 10% revenue loss? Is it the commercial, or I'm curious, why is the revenue loss 10% when we have a high residential demand? So I'm just trying to figure out how that happens. Thank you.
Carmen, that's a great question. Our residential demand is about 35% of our total demand. So even though that's gone up because it's a smaller piece of our total demand, compared to commercial and industrial is closer to 70% of our total demand. So commercial and industrial has gone down by 15%. That's our assumption. In week 1, it went down 23%, the commercial and industrial. Small commercial went down 21%, and residential went up about 20%. So because the residential base is a smaller piece of the big pie, the net is still a decrease. This is being seen even when you go up to California as a whole, the whole state of California. Northern California is showing about an 8.5% to 9% decrease in load so far. Southern California is showing about a 10% decrease in load. We are also monitoring what's happening in other countries. For example, Italy and Germany. So we have subscribed to analyses on what's going on in these other countries too. Italy, for example, has been hit the hardest. And so they are suffering a lot more in terms of their load decrease. So the assumptions that we are using right now seem to be in line with what we have estimated, and also, and from the past, and also what other CCAs are seeing in Northern California.
Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it.
I think Yvonne had a question.
Howard, we can't hear you.
Here, I'm doing such a good job of muting myself, I'm totally forgot. There's all these buttons in front of me, and so I messed myself up. So next up would be Yvonne, and after Yvonne, we're going to do Rod.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
My question was, I think many of us are adjusting to this new COVID, but clearly it's not business as usual. And so I'm wondering what adaptations are happening for employees working at home with children. I've got small children, and it definitely is completely disruptive to the day. Are they able to change schedules, perhaps shifting if they have partners? Are they able to, is there a realistic, I guess, anticipation of what the workload is that they're expected to deliver?
Great question. What I have said to all staff and what the directors have also, and by the way, in the first 2 weeks of shelter in place, we were having 2 all hands meetings per week, and the directors and I were meeting every morning. And I'd ask staff, if there's any issue that you have, please either talk to me directly or talk to me through your directors. I've also reached out to, I believe, most of the staff or all the staff directly who have children.
Great.
And they essentially, whatever they need in terms of flexibility, I've asked the directors to provide them. Also, you have in your last meeting provided up to 20 days of paid time off, which is available for our employees to use. You already had an existing benefit of 5 days or 40 hours of management leave. So that's also available for people to use.
Fantastic.
At this point, in addition to that, we have also talked about the supplies that they need to actually do their work comfortably. We have provided what we think is a very adequate amount of money to allow people to get whatever supplies they need to work effectively from home. We've also said that they can use the money for what we'd say, keeping their morale up, including things like if you want to sign up for a meditation app, go ahead and do it. At our workplace, for example, there's these things like we have art supplies. So people just come up to the lunchroom table and do art supplies. Well, if you want to use your money to get art supplies, whatever you need to manage your own stress, it's going to be different for each person and very individual. So we also were doing surveys twice a week that were anonymous and asking people to just provide us feedback. As of this week, we're making it once a week because after doing it twice a week, on week 3, it was like just tapering off. We had to ask quite a few times, please answer the survey. So we're thinking once a week's good enough now. So we're going to monitor the situation. But, that's how
Great,
we're
thank
dealing
you.
with it.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking care of staff. Rod?
I was wondering if you wanted to expand on what you see as how the net load will vary as long as we're in this, and how that impacts our financials. And I know we're going to talk later about rates and other factors that impact the financials. So I was wondering specifically for every month we are in this state, how it influences things.
So we'll get into the details of how it impacts our finances when we talk about item 4 on the rates. It's the big picture is what I told you in terms of the load loss for this year and next year. I think there are other macro dynamics at work which hasn't come out completely. For example, oil prices. To the extent that world oil prices are low, that puts pressure on drill rigs in the United States, the number of drill rigs that are being utilized for oil exploration in the United States, which then puts pressure on gas. So right now we have a lot of natural gas in storage. That definitely natural gas prices have come down dramatically. But we've noticed just in the last few days, real-time prices have gone up quite a bit. So I think there are going to be differences in how the system is managed. For example, and just to give you another analogy, we're seeing this in Europe too. In the past, a country like Germany, when they had a lot of solar and wind being generated, they could export the excess to other countries. They're running into problems right now because there's demand destruction in other countries. So those are the physical dynamics of how it hasn't unfolded completely. We haven't seen patterns yet. We have put together a team in Monica's group, but it's with other folks too. But Ian Williams is creating a dashboard, which is basically the price dashboard to see how do all these macro events, what's the storyline that we are seeing from prices we are seeing in the past, and how can we forecast it for the future? We're also looking at our hedging strategy. For example, in April, because loads decreased, we had excess power, and we sold about half that excess power. Again, using a diversification strategy of not doing everything at once, so we sold that. That's something that we'll be doing each week. Monica leads up we have an internal risk oversight committee where we look at our portfolio each week, and we'll be making those decisions. We are also going to delegate to Z Global, who's our scheduling coordinator, a little more authority to do daily deals. Essentially, in the past, we handed over their portfolio and they didn't have any flexibility. And that's because loads were quite predictable. Since loads are not predictable and we don't have the staff to get involved in day-to-day hedging, we are going to do the month ahead and then give them more flexibility to manage the day ahead schedules.
Thank you very much.
All right, is there anybody else who has a question or a comment? Let me double check. Is there a member of the public that wishes to speak on this item? I am seeing none. Let me double check with the clerk.
I confirm there are no comments.
Okay, with that, I think we are going to move along to item 3, which is a resolution to grant our chief executive some authority with respect to contracts.
So one thing I've learned in the last 2 weeks is the first thing I should say is, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. Now I can start. How many times in the last 2 weeks where I did not left myself on mute. So thank you, Chair Miller, and good evening, fellow directors. So this resolution, the genesis behind this was back in early March. the public emergency declarations were being made in the county of Sonoma as well as by the governor. It was right around that time that a Sonoma Clean Power board meeting was canceled. And that put all the CCAs on alert that perhaps we should be ready to find a business process to keep operations going in case one of our board meetings were canceled. Over the past month, we've seen an easing of the Brown Act rules that would make it most likely not a high probability that board meetings in the future would get canceled. So in the fact like tonight that we have the technology in place to have this meeting, that we're allowed to have it remotely, and that we need a physical location to be able to handle public comment is going to make it very helpful as we get through this crisis to be able to have board meetings and not have them canceled. So this resolution has a 90-day life, and we'll reevaluate it 90 days from now to see if we still need to continue it. And again, it's to provide authority to the CEO in case a board meeting gets canceled. So I'll just highlight a couple items in the resolution that are critical for us in operations. One is on rates. So this will be somewhat redundant because we'll cover this again in the rates topic, which is coming up next. But I put the language in this resolution just in case by chance there was no decision tonight on rates. This would allow us to still take action if a board meeting did not happen in the next 90 days. And obviously Girish talked about the impending change to the PCIA. So it would be prudent to be able to act on a rates change if we were not to be able to have a board meeting. Also, we added some language. It's very unlikely that in the next 90 days that the trigger mechanism of the PCIA that Girish talked about, which is going to be a tremendous increase in that charge. It's highly unlikely that's going to happen in the next 90 days, but just as a safety valve, we added that language as well. On power supply. So Girish has the authority to execute short-term energy deals through the risk management policy. And as those deals are executed, we do list them monthly in the CEO report. What Girish does not have authority to do is to execute long-term power purchase agreements that are greater than 5 years in length. So last summer, we issued an RFO. We narrowed it down to 6 suppliers that we wanted to negotiate with. Already this year, you've approved the 2 geothermal contracts. Tonight on the docket is also the another solar plus storage contract. So that leaves 3 long-term power purchase agreements left to be taken to the board. In the next 90 days, those agreements will either be taken to the board or will terminate negotiations, but some action will be taken. So we also specify in the resolution the 3 suppliers that we're negotiating with and that authority to be able to execute those deals in case a board meeting is canceled. And then lastly would be business continuity agreements. And so in this case, if to maybe step back for a second, we have 25 employees. When you have an organization that small, any employee that's missing for a length of time is going to be noticed and there'll be an impact to the agency. As an example, and I don't want to jinx Monica, but if, as an example, the Director of Power Resources was unavailable for work for the next 20 days, do we have enough bench strength in-house to be able to carry on those duties and continue operations? So what the resolution language on business continuity addresses is it gives Girish the ability to then procure a contract with energy advisors or amend that contract up to an additional $100,000 to be able to step in and provide help and continue operations. And that's an example of a vendor that's very familiar with our operations and would need notice to be able to step in. So that's an example of the type of business continuity agreements that we're asking for. Just to, in case this question gets brought up, we'll address it now. So let's just say you agree to the resolution. We don't know until next month that the board meeting would or would not be canceled. And next week, we need Pacific Energy advisors on board. In that case, until we know that the board meeting is not being canceled, how would Garish be able to procure $100,000 in incremental funding? And I'll point out that in our purchasing policy that we passed back in 2017, it does allow for the CEO to make emergency purchases up to $150,000 or $500,000 with 2 executive committee board members' approval in the case of an emergency. And indeed, that's where we are right now. So just to recap before I give this chair for a vote or discussion, is that this is a low-risk resolution we're asking for tonight. This would only happen, we're only asking for this delegation of authority if the board be canceled, and it has a 90-day life. As far as of authority not related to COVID-19, that's going to be part of a more comprehensive emergency plan that staff is working on that we'll bring to the board shortly. So with that, concludes my oral report. I'll give it back to the chair for a vote and or discussion.
Thank you, Don. Are there any questions that anyone has? So let's start with Nancy.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the clarification that the contract could be executed without regard to whether there's a board meeting coming up or not. And I wondered if that's also the case with the mid-year budget adjustment, which does not, it's item 3 in the packet, and it doesn't tie to a board meeting either, and nor does I think one of the other items. Yeah, so I think the last 3 or 4 items do not tie necessarily to there being a board meeting or not. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
So if we were to, thank you for the question. So if we were to amend the budget, which we're planning to do next month, that would, we would prefer to have board approval. However, we're looking, and you'll see through the rates presentation, we're looking to reduce revenues, recalibrate expenses. Normally, we would ask for board approval for that. In this case, if the board meeting does not happen, we could then go ahead and make those budget adjustments through the CEO. And then lastly would be the, I think you mentioned customer relief and community resilience. So that will be covered in the resolution regarding the rates discussion, which is next on the docket. But again, this means that if we have that approval tonight to approve that funding for those efforts, then if a board meeting does not happen, this resolution allows us to move forward with agreements that support those efforts. Did I hopefully answer your question?
Yes, I do have another observation to make, or question, which is the, this is, if we approve this tonight, it extends for 90 days, which is July. And we do not currently have a board meeting scheduled for July. We canceled it. So do you feel that given the emergency that we should reinstate that July board meeting?
Do you want to take that one, Garish, or you want me to answer?
Yeah, I think we'll look at it. I believe that was an observation, so I think that's a good idea. And for us to take a look at it, and depending on what the situation is, we may reconsider the July meeting.
Yeah,
not many of us will be on cruises then, so it's
Yeah.
probably available.
Yeah, and given the amount of work that staff is putting in right now, et cetera, it doesn't jump out to me as something we'd want to do. But again, we want to be nimble and adaptable, but I don't see a reason to make the change at this point. But I think it's a good point to keep in mind as the weeks progress, if we need that meeting.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking it's different. My observation is that it's one thing to not be able to call a board meeting, and it's another thing not to have a board meeting scheduled. So that is my observation. And then I think the other question I have is, which month or which meeting would we normally do the mid-year budget adjustment?
We would do it after a rate change is approved, so that would be on the docket for May.
Okay. All right, that's the only questions I
Thank you, Nancy. So we're going to do Javed and then Liz.
Thank you for your presentation, and again, thank you for the staff for all the good work you guys are doing. I did notice that whatever action you take, you're going to give us a report within 7 days after that action is taken.
That is correct.
Okay. And the other question I had is, even though there's not a board meeting, it's easy to contact at least the members of the executive team. Should there be some provision that they get notified before that action is taken in an emergency? If they're not available, I can understand that, but at least the executive committee or at least 2 of the members of the executive committee should be available. So wouldn't that be appropriate to suggest that such actions would they should at least be given 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever reasonable notice, so they can get back to you on that? Would that be a problem for you guys?
No, in fact, we cover that language in the purchasing policy as well, so that's prudent for us to follow that.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Javed. Liz and then Nisa.
My comments following up to Nancy. I wondered about the July meeting as well, given the 90 days. And the fact that we can always call a special meeting at any point. I think we're covered. Overall, I appreciated this effort because our organization didn't have what cities have, which is an emergency operation plan. So this kind of sets up a parallel document, which I think was done very expeditiously and appropriately. So I'm appreciate the discussion that we're having on this.
Great, thanks, Liz. Nisa.
Thanks, Howard. So my question also follows up on Nancy's point about the July meeting, because how I read the emergency resolution was the cancellation of the meeting related to COVID. And so because the July meeting was already canceled, or we weren't planning to do a July meeting, I didn't see this resolution as applying to July. So, I didn't expect staff to say, well, there's no meeting in July, so we're going to act upon the resolution. And so I guess I could get clarification from the team whether or not the resolution is intended for any meeting that's not held. For example, if we don't have quorum, and so it's not a cancellation related to COVID where we're not able to have meetings, if they'd be able to act upon the resolution.
Maybe Greg has some thoughts on this one.
So it would not apply to the July meeting. So it would have to be a meeting now that is presently scheduled to occur. And then only those during the state of emergency could be trigger this resolution.
Did that get your question? Okay. Rod?
Yeah, I'm wondering if if we were in this circumstance, what does this provision do for us to, if we are able to call a special meeting, would we do that in lieu of invoking this power? Thanks.
That could be done. So again, there would be a consultation with the chair or vice chair, and if the meeting was going to be had to be canceled due to unavailability of board members, at that point in time, there could be a decision by the chair or vice chair to actually try to schedule a special meeting. If that could not be done, then again, this resolution would apply.
I mean, I'll say that I would actually, if possible, would prefer to do a special meeting. If is impossible, or if we can't establish quorum, then, you know, I'm generally in favor of empowering our CEO to do what's necessary.
Yeah, the intent here was to cover those situations where the board simply could not meet due to conditions that right now probably are not going to happen. So, but that would be, again, noticing a special meeting, as you know, is quite simple, 24 hours notice. And that also could be done.
Yeah, California is lucky in this situation. If you were in Westchester County, New York, 1 out of 50 people has this. It turns out to be 1 out of 25 between the ages of 30 and 60, which is most of the board here. You could see, unfortunately, not being able to get a quorum in Westchester right now. So knock on wood, California is in a good space, but hopefully we never have to really use this to some great extent. Carmen and then Yvonne.
Thank you, Chair Miller. So I'm a little unclear on the July meeting. Now we are not having a meeting in July because that's what we always do, not have a meeting in July. Like for example, our city council, we don't have meetings in July. Is that what that is all about? So, and then the 90-day, I know we have that 90-day provision from the governor, but who's to say that he will not extend that 90 days to, you know, further out. So I just wanted to be clear on the July. So that means that we don't have, so the Silicon Valley Clean Energy does not have meetings in July.
Yeah, we went through a process to cancel that
Okay.
July meeting
Okay.
earlier on. And
I
then,
think I wasn't here that on the board at that time.
yeah,
Okay.
and then I just got to say, staff is working on a more comprehensive sort of emergency response plan. And this 90-day thing is kind of a stopgap until we can get a more comprehensive kind of emergency preparedness plan. Is that what you called it, Liz? But, you know, eventually we will have a set of policies that we all agree before we're in crisis. That's going to be how we operate. And I don't mean to step on any staff member's toes. Maybe.
We're working on it. Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Okay, my plan was to go to Yvonne and then Nancy, maybe, but definitely Yvonne, and then we'll see who else wants to talk.
Thank you, Howard. My question is just really of course, we all hope that this is the end of it, but we've heard where there have been relapses. So if this were to end, let's say the shelter in place ends, we believe that we're through COVID and there is a relapse of some sort. Does this apply then as well? Would this have to be invoked again? Greg, maybe you can.
Yeah, this would have to be invoked again because it only stays in effect during the state of emergency. So once the state of emergency goes away, we'd have to act again. The board would have to reauthorize another resolution if there's another state of emergency invoked.
Okay, thank you.
Garish had a comment, though I didn't call on him in a timely fashion, sorry. But if you still wish to comment.
No, I'm good now. I'd wait for all the board members to make their comments. And
Okay. Is there anyone else who wishes to ask a question or comment on this? Seeing none, let me go to our members of the public. I believe that we have one member of the public that wishes to speak. And we'll see how we administer all this, but James Talia wishes to speak. Go ahead, James.
Hi, this is James Talia, resident of Sunnyvale. I just wanted to say I appreciate all of your work and the staff's work during this time, and to say that I support this this plan. It seems quite appropriate and reasonable. Thanks.
Thank you, James. Is there any other member of the public that wishes to speak? We have somebody ending with phone number 597. Okay, I got to ask staff who's working behind the scenes behind me. Have I misinterpreted that this phone number wishes to speak?
I did not see a hand raised for that particular number, no.
Okay. And then we already took care of James, so I think we're okay there. Okay, I see no further members of the public that wish to speak on this item. Is that what you believe also?
Correct, I did not receive any emailed comments either.
Okay, so I bring it back to us, the board. Any further discussion or a motion, because we are going to need to take action on this formally.
And the motion would be to adopt resolution number 2020-13.
Okay, we're going to start with Nancy.
Yeah, I thought, well, firstly, did Garish want to say any more? I think, no, he's.
Oh yeah, Grisha, if there's something else you need to add, please.
No. Okay, so what I was thinking is, when we talk about the July timeframe, et cetera, if there's some discomfort around that, I think we're very open to, you could make it 60 days. We could also add to the resolution that we will work to get a special meeting of the board organized. And it's only if we cannot get a special meeting of the board done timely. And then the third could be we talk to, if it comes to me exercising this authority, connect up with the chair and vice chair before I invoke this authority.
Yeah, I could move that we make this 60 days, that we do everything to establish quorum for a special meeting. If we do invoke the power, that Girish would seek advice and counsel from the chair and vice chair.
Second.
Okay. Nancy's trying so hard because she raised her hand and everything. So if I understand the motion on the floor, it is 60 days rather than 90 days, and that we ask Girish to definitively or attempt to.
Yeah, and I think my intention would be right at our regularly scheduled meeting 2 months from now, decide what's appropriate for the next period. We have a meeting, it's convenient, and we can just see, you know, how we want to bridge whatever's needed in the summer based on information 2 months from now, which will hopefully we'll be in better shape.
Okay, and we're sure that 60 days, it's not 61 days to our next meeting or something like that?
Well, why don't I tweak this a bit to say until our regularly scheduled June meeting.
June 10th.
Thank you.
Nancy, does that sound okay?
I accept the revision of the motion, yes.
Okay, and then Rod, on the second half of your motion had to do with checking in with members of the executive committee. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, or just the chair and vice chair. I would be happy enough with that. I mean, I think, I guess my preference would be to say, let's have a special board meeting if at all possible. If we can't get a quorum, or for whatever logistics or circumstances, we can't make that happen, then I would hope that we would invoke the executive committee. If that doesn't happen, then consulting with chair and or vice chair as available would make sense.
I understand the motion. I want to make a couple just observations. And I don't mean to pick on Monica, but let's say Monica did decide accidentally she got this, and Girish had to hire a consultant in a hurry to kind of backfill her spots. You know, we're talking 50 or 80,000. I mean, we're not talking that much money. Is it kind of overweight to get that much of a process in place? Like calling us a whole special meeting? Or do we?
Let me clarify.
Yeah, please.
Don, and you can jump in here. For extending contract amounts, we don't plan to come back to you and do this. Extending contract amounts for existing contracts will go through the emergency purchasing policy that we have. That's already exists. So that's not subject to the resolution in front of you.
Okay, that helps me a lot. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's the bigger ones like rates, long-term contracts. Those are the ones we're talking about.
Okay, excellent. Rob Rennie had a comment or question.
Yeah, thank you, Howard. This is a question probably for Greg. I did mention this to Girish before. At VTA, when we did our emergency resolutions, it was mentioned that I'm going to call them special districts like VTA and our CCA can't do emergency resolutions. They actually do it by connection to the county's emergency resolution. So when the county's is rescinded, that would force ours to be rescinded. Is that the case for what we're considering here, Greg?
Well, yes. So we did tie this into the emergency declaration. So we would be writing on that being in effect during this period of time.
And so if they cancel theirs, ours automatically cancels with it. Is that correct?
Oh, well, no, the declaration of emergency would have to be canceled or terminated, I should say.
So if the county terminates theirs, ours can keep going?
No, ours we would end at that point in time because we're really tying this into that existing emergency.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure that I understood that correctly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, Liz, unmute.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a quick question. Does the county go out 90 days? And if it does, I almost think we should leave it at the 90 days.
The county, well, so we're referring to both the state emergency and also the county emergency. The county emergency right now expires, well, actually their order expires on May 7th, but their declaration of emergency is also indefinite, as is the state one. So those will have to be terminated by action of the Board of Supervisors, for example, in Santa Clara County.
All right, then I'll accept the motion as the 60 days then. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments on this motion? And we already did the members of the public. So let me go to our clerk and ask for a roll call vote.
So just to clarify here, this is the adoption of Resolution 2020-13 with the changes, the 3 changes that have been outlined.
Yes.
Thank you. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith,
Aye.
Gibbons,
Aye.
Sinks,
Aye.
Flagger,
Yes.
Tyson,
Yes.
Rennie,
Aye.
Montano,
Aye.
Elahi,
Aye.
Martinez Beltran,
Apologies, aye.
thank you. Abe Koga,
Aye.
thank you. The motion carries.
Excellent. Thank you guys for that. Okay. Back to my script. Moving right along. Item number 4, adopt a resolution to implement generation rate changes effective May 1st. Don, the other Don.
All right. Thank you, Chair Miller. Am I coming through sound-wise? All right.
You are good. And
Great.
presentation just needs to go into there we go. That looks
Okay.
good too.
Good. All right. So I'm going to be going through the presentation tonight along with Don Eckert. We're going to cover different portions of this. Every year, of course, PG&E goes through a major rate change. Typically, it's at the start of the year. This year, it's gotten bumped out a little bit, and it's scheduled for May 1st. And when these major rate changes happen, it's important that we act quickly. If PG&E makes a major rate cut, it's important that we respond to that so that we continue to offer a competitive service to our customer. We need to balance that with contribution to operating reserves. We need to balance it with risks that we're facing in the market. And of course, we're facing very substantial risks and challenges at the moment. So in the interest of time and clarity, I'm going to jump straight to the final recommendation here, and then we'll go through and cover some of the details behind this. But our recommendation is that the board direct the CEO and staff to maintain the current 4% discount that we have to PG&E. This will result in a revised contribution to reserves this year of about $30 million. For a variety of reasons, it's come down to 30 from 50. Some of that's related to COVID load loss, of course. And then of that 30, 20 be committed longer term to reserves, and 10 be committed to near-term customer relief and community resilience activities. So that's the overall arc to the recommendation, that we maintain our discount and then see these results in our business. Next slide, please. In terms of background, we're anticipating a 21% increase in the PCIA effective May 1st. We're expecting that PG&E's generation rates are going to go up very slightly. They're pretty close to flat, up by 0.4%. The combined impact of these two changes is a negative 8% to SVCE. Most of that's because of that big PCIA increase. And what that negative 8% means is that we need to lower our current rates by 8% to maintain the same discount that we have today. So that's what that impact number means. If we take no action, as of May 1st, our current rates on average would be about at a 4% premium to PG&E. So that's -4 where we are today, and then that 8% impact, putting us at a 4% premium. So to limit the impact, of course, we want to move to lower our generation rates by May 1st. To do that, we'd like to pre-approve a discount level that we can apply to the actual rates that we'll get at the end of April, so that we can be ready to go with new rates in early May. As I mentioned, we're recommending that SVCE maintain its current discount of 4%. This will mean an 8% decrease in gen rates. It means that we effectively neutralize the impact of that PCIA increase to our customers. To the end customer, the customer's rate's going to look flat, but we won't have allowed it to increase by not making the rate reduction that's noted here. It's also been suggested that we establish guardrails. Several of you that have been on the board for a while will recognize this, but in the event that PG&E's rate changes come in differently than we anticipate, we want to have a formula for potentially adjusting that discount up or down from 4%. So we'll talk about that here in a minute. Next slide. In terms of uncertainties that we're facing, Girish covered this very well in his CEO report. Just a quick summary, the big ones out there are another prospective increase that we're going to see in the PCIA towards the end of the year, another 50% increase on top of the increase that we've just had, meaning it'll be about an 80% increase for the year. When that happens, it'll be in place for probably close to a year. We're going to see potential impact to our operating reserves, a call on reserves potentially, if we're going to keep our rates competitive, given that very dramatic short-term increase in the PCIA. We're also facing load loss concerns, as Girish mentioned, 10% across our load, 15% in C&I. We expect that we're going to see more issues with customer payments, and that'll be delayed payments to us, as well as additional customer defaults, both residential and business. So these are some of the additional uncertainties that are out there that we need to factor into our thinking. Next slide, please. Don, do you want to jump into the budget impacts?
Okay, thank you, the other Don. This slide would cover the question that Director Sinks had earlier in the CEO report, is to put some math behind parts of what's been changing. So back in September, we adopted a budget of $50.6 million operating surplus. That budget assumed no change in the PCIA, no change to PG&E rates, and we thought we were being conservative by having minimal change in megawatt hour sales. And fast forward now to 6 months later, and for all the reasons described earlier on the COVID-19 impact and the world economy shutting down, to be on the conservative side, we've assumed a 15% reduction in commercial industrial load, which equates to about annualized 10% reduction in overall load for March through September, so the rest of this fiscal year. We hope certainly that it would not go that long, but we're being conservative. That would reduce gross revenues by just a shade under 20 million. Now we do have some upside to that, in that if we have less load that we're serving, then we should also have less power supply cost. However, we are 100% hedged, which was prudent through our risk management policy through the rest of this fiscal year. And we should be able to sell some of that excess power, but we did factor we may not be able to sell it for what we bought it for, considering current market conditions. So we ran various simulation models. We're comfortable that we can reduce our power supply budget by about 0.5 million. Don talked about earlier in the presentation, we're also looking at a 21% weighted average increase effective May 1. That further reduces revenues by 9.2. Have the two negatives, you have the positive and power supply, and that's how we come up with the $30 million. If this passes tonight, this would be our new, most likely where we end up on an amended budget next month, around $30 million surplus for this fiscal year. Next slide, please. Thank you. So to put some context around Don's comment earlier in the presentation about 20 million going into reserves, why are we asking for that? So as of right now, I'm projecting for next fiscal year, our operating expenses will be very close to around 270 million. However, that's going to get recalibrated as we go through the budget process this summer. But as of right now, I'm anticipating 270 million next year in operating expenses. If we want to end this fiscal year, reserves target of 180 days cash, then half that 270 million, we want to end this fiscal year with 135 million in reserves. Now we ended last fiscal year, last September 30th, with 119 million in unrestricted cash. So to get to that 135 million at the end of this year, at a very minimum, we want to be able to contribute 16 million to reserves, but we're asking for 20 just to give us some leeway as we go through the budget process. That 270 may be a higher number, maybe a lower number, but we're asking for a little cushion into the reserves target to be able to have a $20 million contribution to reserves. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so as we go through a rate setting process, it always becomes a balance between the needs of the utility and creating ratepayer value. In normal rates proceedings with the board, the needs of the utility is we need to build up reserves in anticipation of volatility, credit ratings, et cetera. On the ratepayer side, it's usually the ratepayer value is created through carbon-free energy. We have a discount to PG&E, and we fund programs. But as Girish pointed out earlier in the CEO report, these are not usual times as we set rates. And when we talk about load loss numbers, as pointed out, behind that 10% load reduction are small businesses worrying about making payroll, employees who have already been impacted by those businesses not being able to make payroll. So our recommendation tonight, I believe, achieves this balance in that we set aside 20 million towards reserves on the left side of the pendulum. We end this fiscal year at our reserves target. as Garish alluded to in the CEO report, we're preparing for a offer of a change on the PCIA. And if you think about the lower market prices we're seeing right now, lower load to be able to collect on the PCIA, we should be looking at in an even harsher situation that we have already anticipated. So we know that a PCIA storm is coming next year. So putting us in a position to be at our reserves target at the end of this year is the prudent thing to do. But on the other side of the pendulum, our recommendation tonight also creates ratepayer value. So we continue with carbon-free energy serving our territory. We continue with the 4% discount, which creates $13 million in ratepayer savings by the end of this fiscal year. We continue to fund programs of $6 million into the programs fund to continue to bend the carbon curve. And as Don talked about earlier, another 10 million set aside for customer relief and community resiliency. Those details will be forthcoming, and I believe Garish and Don will talk a little bit more details at the end of this presentation. So on one side, you're creating 20 million in reserves, set us up very nicely for next year. On the other side, 30 million, if you add those three up on ratepayer value. With that, I'll to Don to conclude the presentation.
All right, thank you, Don. Andrea, next slide. Yeah, so I mentioned the guardrails earlier. This is effectively the result of that formula. If the changes to the PCIA and the gen rate from PG&E come in at or near where we expect, we would maintain the recommended 4% discount. In the event they come in worse to us, even worse than they already are, then we would migrate that discount downwards in the direction of 1%. So if gen rates, let's say, were to decrease by 2 or 3%, in addition to the PCIA increase, that would result in a negative 10 or 11% impact to us, and that would put us at the corresponding value in this chart, say a 2% discount level. So it's important that as part of the recommendation here tonight and the decision that you make, that you understand that there is this ability to potentially flex that discount if we're surprised at the end of the day by what comes back to us from PG&E. We're feeling pretty confident, just given how close we are to the date and the recency of the information that we received through the filings, but you never know for sure. So it's important that we have this in place. Okay, next slide. All right, so just in summary, we're recommending a 4% discount that be carried forward that neutralizes the impact to our customers at this critical time of this very significant 20% increase in the PCIA. It continues to produce an operating surplus for us of $30 million, 20 of which committed to long-term reserves and leaving us at our long-term reserve target, and allowing for a $10 million set aside for short-term relief and long-term resiliency activities. So that concludes our presentation.
Okay, I might have hit a wrong button there, but hopefully everybody's still with me. Garish, if you could comment on the $10 million to customers and the overall picture of this.
Okay, great. So when I had the CEO report, I talked about the headwinds that have been made worse by COVID. And Don also previewed, we do know the trigger on the PCIA is coming in. What you've done so far in setting us up with our strong financial reserves allows us to actually spend $10 million to help our community. So we are looking at customer relief and community resiliency. The four kind of buckets, I'll just give you examples of these, but we would like direction from you so that we can come back in May with more specifics. Customer relief would be something, sorry, my dog was on me. Want to be petted, sorry, push her away. So customer relief is actually providing, say, bill credits to customers directly. So these would be low-income customers that we could provide bill credits. We're looking at ways in which we can target, maybe there's some customers who are more impacted than others. So we want a targeted program there. On the community resiliency end of the spectrum, we're looking at providing grants to each of our agencies so that you can invest in making some of your key public facilities more resilient. We know that PSPS events are going to be following very shortly in June, July, and with the addition of COVID, it may make things even worse. So we want to have a way of supporting that. Kind of in between this are two other programs, which you can say maybe it's more customer related. We're looking at how do we support the workforce and specifically electricians and plumbers who may be slowing down on their work. And we are looking at ways in which maybe we can have some online training for them and pay them for that training. Also looking at some kind of EV, electric vehicle program that would be targeted towards our lower income customers, a way in which we can support that. So these are the general ideas we have. All staff has participated in generating more than 25 different ideas on this. We'll collect this and we'll bring this back to you in May. In the meantime, we are working already with the community colleges on the online training program. If there's a need for a special meeting to get this approved before the May meeting, we will call for one.
Great, thanks, Girish. Okay, so I've got questions and comments starting with Liz and then George.
Thank you. So I appreciate the analysis. It was very straightforward. And what I particularly like is, yes, we had a $50-odd million surplus going into our reserves. We're using the 30 million target to absorb the 8% delta that you've explained. And of that 30, we've got the 20-10 split, which still lets us get to our reserve target. But I particularly think that it's of note that this is using the 4% discount, and we have a buffer. We have a buffer of going to 1% if we need. So that makes all of these numbers fit for me quite comfortably. So my questions, and Girish just mentioned one, but the PCIA amount, what happened to this discussion on cap? I thought there was a cap to PCIA and there was a challenge to that. Where do we stand with that? Where does everyone stand with that?
Great question, Liz. So the PCIA has a cap of a half-cent increase. So PG&E cannot increase the PCIA more than half a cent unless certain conditions are met. And those conditions have to do with how much they're under collecting because they have a cap on what they want to charge. So they would like to actually move their PCIA from about 2.7 cents to about 4.2 and 4.3 cents.
Right.
So that's what they filed. So we expect somewhere in the August to September timeframe, they will file what's known as a trigger application to collect the rest of the PCIA when the cap won't be a cap anymore. There's nothing to stop them from doing that. That's when we will be protesting. It's too early to protest because they actually haven't filed the cap. And so it's going to be August, September that we expect the trigger. In terms of strategies for managing that, we are appealing, so these are through more informal meetings with CPUC staff, to consider moving the trigger to the next year's PCIA, as opposed to having the trigger show up in this year, and then we have another PCIA bump in the next year. There's so many of these accounts that are moving up, some moving down, some are based on forecasts, some are based on actuals. Instead of having multiple changes, we are suggesting, why don't you wait for next year, combine as many of these changes as you can. This is TBD, and that's where we are on the trigger. But one way or the other, Liz, we're going to pay this. It's just a matter of timing. There's no way out of paying it. We have protested the actual amount of payment through this process, and we were able to reduce the amount that PG&E was charging. There were some errors in their calculations that were found by CCA staff, and those numbers were reduced. But now that that number has been determined, we're going to pay it. Or should I say our customers?
Yes, you know my opinion about that. Okay, and my final question is in terms of potential risk to revenue, in the forecast that we're talking about to the 30 million, how does lost revenue, accounts that have gone bad, and do we have a track record of the PSPS's last year? So have we built in a factor for the impact of higher than normal lost revenue from failed accounts or the PSPS events?
So why don't I start, and the Dons can fill in some of the gaps I'm sure I will have. The PSPS really did not affect us materially. We only had 20% of our total customer base impacted at various periods of time, and the duration of those outages didn't have a measurable impact on our finances. Similarly, we've looked at our customers right now. We haven't seen an increase in delinquencies yet, but maybe getting to the point of your question of how this could impact us, given that customers are not going to be shut off by PG&E, they're not going to be turned back to PG&E on account of non-payment of our bills. And given that we expect, we already see widespread hundreds of thousands of jobs lost through applications for unemployment, we expect there to be a tremendous amount of either delinquencies or customers asking for payment plans. And payment plans essentially are to spread their obligation over multiple months. So someone's in hardship, they may ask for a delay. And so that's one aspect, and the other is just purely delinquencies. We are working with PG&E right now on how we can manage the payment of these payment plans. At this point in time, the risk is completely carried by CCAs, and we have estimated that we may have to float close to $8 million so that will be a cash flow squeeze for us just on these payment plans, because PG&E will be taking the first dollar that comes in from the customers. We are working as we speak on this. There were meetings held with PG&E yesterday. We are also filing as CalCCA with the Public Utilities Commission. I think the date we are filing is tomorrow on asking for relief from the way in which this payment waterfall is happening. So maybe it's a long answer, but there is some cash flow risk for us.
That was my point. Thank you very much.
Challenging times. Okay, a bunch of people want to comment, so we'll start with George and then Nisa.
Thank you, Howard. I just want to say that I think that this plan that you described sounds very balanced and very thoughtful. And I see that you're looking out for different people's interests. And when I think about the reserves, it's not really a fixed dollar amount. It's a certain percent or number of days of sales. And so the fact that our revenue has decreased means our amount of reserves should shrink, the required reserves, I would say. And so I just want to make sure that we're thinking ahead to, if the revenue pops back to the number we had before, that our reserves would be commensurately adjusted to meet that new target.
Yeah, reserves are always expressed in terms of a range. So there was some some wiggle room within that rather than a single number. And it's lucky, or it's great this year that we will land solidly in the middle of the range for the first time, even with all the economic uncertainty. So I think you're right. It's a good balanced plan. Nisa?
I have two questions. One has to do with the 4% discount and whether or not we would want flexibility to give an even bigger discount. So how did we arrive at 4%? And I know it's based on estimating or guessing what PG&E will come back with, but I wonder if it's, more than, I don't remember what the table was, but a level up from where the 4% starts if we want to give ourselves the flexibility, even though it's highly unlikely that that's what will happen, but just in the directive, give us the flexibility of allowing you to go up to a 5% discount. And if not, I'm curious what the thinking is there. Maybe there's some formula how we arrived at the 4%. And then my second question has to do with the May 1st date. Is that an automatic trigger date? With so many things getting canceled or pushed out, I'm wondering if there's a chance for that date to get pushed out as well.
So let me just start and have Don Bray answer this too. We are looking at 4% being a floor. And part of the reason is we've been at 4% already, and I think we don't know what the future holds for us. So part of this rate making, there is a political element to it. So I think if we go to 1%, yeah, there's a little bit more explaining to do. But on the other hand, if we go to 5 and 6% discount, there is, we start to maybe have less money overall in our reserves. So I'm balancing the two. So if it comes out, the uncertainty on the PCIA, the uncertainty of power markets, it seems like 4% is what we've been working on so far. Year one, we were at 1%. The next year we were at 6%, and now we are at 4%. It seems like a good discount for our customers. And also, we actually have, there are many large customers who will be doing perfectly fine. There's if we go for more of a discount, everyone gets it. So we think keeping reserves at a healthy level and maybe targeting reserves to groups that may be hurting more is what we'd like to do. And Don,
And then
would
the
you like
second
to?
question has to do with the May 1st. And thanks for that, Girish. I really want to commend staff for being, forward thinking and thinking about how we can really help the community as we're all going through this together.
And your second question?
The May 1st date, I was asking what, Don?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the question's well taken. There is a possibility, of course, that it could get pushed out. We have not heard that that's going to happen, and the date is definitely getting closer, right? We're expecting that we'll get PG&E's rates the fourth week of April. So if it were going to be delayed, we should know by now. But yeah, it's happened before, and it could happen again. And if it did, it would, I think once a couple of years ago, we saw a 1 month bump. I mean, it got bumped out slightly. I think, again, given the level of the PCIA increase and really the need to be recovering that money, and the fact that it's been delayed from what is typically a January date, right, when the big rate change is done for a year, it's been delayed until May. I think at this point it's not likely, but it could happen.
Good. Okay, so let's move along. Javed and then Yvonne.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And I think we should change our name from Silicon Valley Clean Energy to Silicon Valley Clean Juggling Energy or something like that. I mean, you guys have a lot of juggling to do with everything that's coming up. The financials you guys gave, I think they were through January, showed about $1.5 million approximately that was 120 days late, and probably another $1 million or so that's within 60 or 90 days and 120 days. Now these financials reflect whatever collections were made from October to January, I believe. So they don't really reflect the COVID virus impact on people who are not paying. The $10 million that you're reserving for customer service, I'm wondering how much of that would just be offset by collections that get delayed and are and are not collectible. And also, who does the collection? If people don't pay, does PG&E send them? Well, I guess right now nobody's probably going to do that for a little while. But generally speaking, it's PG&E's job to try to collect because they're first in line anyway. And you guys have to just take a backseat on that.
Yes, PG&E does the collection. They have well, first of all, they can shut off power. They're not doing that now, but historically, they've had that power. They also have additional customer information like social security numbers, credit card numbers, that sort of thing that we don't have. So they're really positioned to be the collection agency. And yeah, you're right, for residential customers, they're first in line. But they do attempt to get the entire amount back. Don Eckert, I don't know if you want to comment on the balances relative to how those collection numbers work year to year. But.
Yeah, so we do, on the revenues that you see on the Treasury report, those are net of 0.5% that we already allocate towards bad debt. So we anticipate yearly somewhere around $1.5 million that we will not collect. So to your point, Javed, a lot of those accounts that we have in that greater than 90 days bucket, they've already been sent back to PG&E, but they're still bucket because PG&E has not written that account off. So many of those dollars already have been sent back to PG&E. They just don't reflect it in the aging report because PG&E controls when they actually turn that account off.
Thank you.
Are we good? Next is Yvonne.
Thanks, Howard. My question, I think it was Garish who was saying that we went from 6% to 4%, and we're currently at 4%. With this, we would be staying at 4%. If the PCIA wasn't to have changed the rates, what would be our targeted discount for this year and next?
You mean
we could get back to you with an answer on that, but I would say it's possible it would be closer to 6% if we didn't have the PCIA issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we do, and we have
do.
COVID.
Right. Yep. And just to add to it, we started year one with a 1% discount for our agency. That's how we started. So it was 164. So we've been moving.
164, and we'd be at 4 with the room to adjust as we find it may change more, as you said, once
the actuals coming in. Yes. And
Right.
I'm just going to make a forecast. Sorry, Don, you can follow me. Sorry. I think that we will most likely be changing our discount closer to 1%. That would be our recommendation next year. It's just that we know what that PCIA bomb is. The numbers are there. It's just that the cap doesn't allow PG&E to charge our customers at this point in time. So it's coming.
And we know that.
Yeah, we know it's coming. It's just a matter of, is it going to be last quarter of this year or the first or second quarter of next year? Sorry, Don, please.
Well, I was just going to say that 6% discount, if some of you may remember, was a big discount, and we made a big jump. Part of that was because of an extraordinary increase that PG&E made in their rates. So we were able to offer a greater discount because our costs didn't go up that much. And so it was just, that was a matter of balancing our needs to contribute to reserves with the ability to make an expanded discount. So we had a long conversation around that discount level, and that was really what motivated that. But like Girish says, looking out into the future, we're facing a different scenario with this dramatic increase to the PCIA, which could last a year or two. Then hopefully we'll return to that being a more predictable amount, like we would.
And again, when are we anticipating that change to be?
It's going to be in the October timeframe is when we're anticipating it.
Okay. And would there be an opportunity to adjust that discount before then?
Yes.
And
We've
when are
done
you
that. We've done that before too. I think it's going to depend on how we're doing relative to the crisis that we're in. What we think is actually going to happen in October. I think Girish and others may have mentioned that there are efforts to try and push this PCIA increase into next year, or to mitigate the severity of it in some fashion. This is all going to unfold over the next several months, and I think when October rolls around, we may go to 1%, like Girish said, or some other number if it hasn't gotten that bad yet.
Okay. Well, thank you to the staff. This is, I do feel like this is really a balanced approach. I appreciate all the thought that's gone into it. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions from our group? Seeing none, then let us go to the public and see if there's any member of the public that wishes to comment. And I have on my list James Talea. Go ahead, James.
Hi, good evening. James Talea, resident of Sunnyvale and chair of Carbon Free Silicon Valley. So I wanted to express my support for the staff's recommendation as Don went through, and then related to the questions that were answered. I also would say that it's very balanced and appropriate for the situation, because we're not only trying to keep the rates as stable as possible within the environment that PG&E raises things up and down all the time. So, there's that, plus all the things that we're trying to do with the organization on the ratepayer side, the customer side, and the whole mission of the organization to reduce carbon emissions. And you have to have money for that. And as Girish mentioned, it's better to be able to have the funds, with smaller discounts. You have the funds, and then you can target that rather than just giving away money that you're not really using as wisely as you could if you would spend it in a more targeted manner. So I think the way the staff is looking at it is very, very good. I've been involved with many of the earlier discussions and all the way back to the beginning where the 1% was discussed. And all this is very consistent with that in the mission of the organization. So I wanted to say that this is a very good proposal and that I strongly support it.
Thanks, James. Is there any other member of the public that wishes to speak on this item? Let me check with our clerk and see if there's any feedback from other sources.
I confirm there are no additional public comments.
Okay, I think we got everybody. So let me go back to us, and we're going to start with Rod.
Yeah, I will chime in also and say, we've been working on this for a few years. I think this represents our best attempt to balance and get it right. Really appreciate, the thoughtful work that's gone into this. I think we can demonstrate leadership in how we respond to the crisis, as we've seen some of the best around the country and the world do. And, you know, I'm in support of this plan, and I would move it.
We'll take that as a motion for
I second it.
recommendation. Who was the second?
Liz?
Liz. All right. So we have a motion, a second. Are there other discussion or comments on this item? I'd like to thank staff for literally spending the last 4 months tracking the whole rate situation to land us at a stable spot. And the COVID thing just threw another curveball at us. This is a highly complicated business, and I am grateful for our financial strength and our ability to navigate these shark-infested waters every single time and land in a stable spot, both for our customers and our financials. One other item, I just want to make sure this is correctly reflected in the motion, is that we are giving staff the flexibility based on that table to respond should things break in an unexpected way.
Yes, that would be my motion, basically the staff report with that flexibility.
And that's reflected in the resolution that you will be adopting.
Yes. Thank you, Greg. Anybody else from final comments? Then I will go to our clerk. Let's get a roll call vote, please.
Yes, thank you. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith,
Aye.
Gibbons, Finks,
Aye.
Liger,
Yes.
Tyson,
Yes.
Rennie,
Aye.
Montano,
Aye.
Elahi,
Yes.
Martinez Beltran,
Aye.
Abekova.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Perfect. Okay, so let's move along. Item number 5 is authorize the CEO to execute a confirmation agreement with PG&E to receive their carbon-free allocation for 2020. And I think Girish is going to do this presentation.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Next slide, please. So here is the recommendation. This basically is a request that the board approve the allocation of the greenhouse gas-free attributes associated with PG&E's hydroelectric and nuclear plants that we have been paying for. And it's only for this year. It's through mid-2020 through the end of 2020. We have brought this to you in a prior meeting. The last time we discussed this was in December. And we also have a long-term allocation, which is being dealt with under a different PUC regulatory process, and it's not yet completed. We expect that process to be completed at the end of the year. So all we are talking about today is the allocation of these greenhouse gas attributes for the rest of the calendar year. Next slide, please. PCIA, again, it's we can't get by it. So just in terms of explaining what the PCIA is, on the left-hand side is essentially the cost of a resource. So PG&E has resources, nuclear, renewable, hydrothermal. All the customers at SVCE were at one time PG&E's bundled customers. So PG&E actually has built resources on the left column for all customers in Northern California, pretty much, except for municipal utilities. Well, once CCAs got formed, actually it was a little before that, but essentially customers who exit PG&E still have to pay PG&E what's known as an exit fee. And the exit fee is the cost of the power that they say they bought for customers who are exiting that is above the market value, because PG&E still controls the resource and sells it into the market, but the market price may be less than what they paid for it. And that's what the right-hand side column is. So there's no argument about that. And the blue solid line is essentially everything on the left column above the blue solid line is the PCIA. Well, it's actually, we believe, it's the dotted line which should be considered the value, because there is actually value for that top bar on the right-hand side, the light blue, which is the value of a greenhouse gas attribute. PG&E has valued that at 0. And as a result, the PCIA is higher. The CPUC back in 2018 ordered that several working groups get created to address these issues. And as part of that process, the working groups' final reports and the whole process will be completed in summer and the end of the year. But in the interim, PG&E has agreed to provide these greenhouse gas attributes to customers such as ourselves who have left their service. So if you could go to the next slide, Andrea. So today, we are paying the above market cost of the hydro and the nuclear within the PCIA. At the same time, we are purchasing carbon-free attributes from other suppliers. In past years, we didn't have a choice because those attributes were not going to be provided to us. This year, those attributes will be provided to us in May or June. And as a result, if we have the opportunity to take it and stop paying twice or stop paying twice for the same attribute. Next slide. So here are the alternatives that we have. We can accept the large hydro and nuclear attributes, or we could accept just large hydro. There is another alternative, which I just didn't add here because I don't think it's really practical, which is don't accept either. I think the only discussion item we've had here is should we accept nuclear or not. I want to make clear that neither alternative, whether we take alternative 1 or 2, alters the actual operation of the nuclear and hydro plants. I also want to make clear that we did not directly source any nuclear energy. That's something we haven't done, we don't plan on doing. These are purely the environmental attributes that get spun off from these plants running. Next slide, please. So here are the alternatives. If we take 1, it'll add between $2 to $3 million to our reserves, and our power supply mix, which will show up in our annual power content label, is on the 3rd bullet, and it will show us having about 12% of nuclear. Alternative 2 will add substantially less to our reserves, between 600,000 to 1.2 million. And the power content label will be 48% RPS, 52% hydro. And the green prime power supply mix doesn't change in either of these scenarios. That's essentially my presentation. If the next slide has the recommendation, which is the staff recommendation to accept the hydro and nuclear allocation just for the year 2020 and add approximately somewhere between $2 to $3 million to SVCE's reserves. That's my presentation, open to questions.
And this is one of those things that sounds complicated, but we're doing nothing in the world in terms of changing how power is generated. We're just getting the money that PG&E's kind of slipped off the side. So we're just getting the money that for attributes that we've already paid for. So with that, let me see if there are any questions or comments. We're going to start with Nancy.
Yeah, hi. I take copious notes, so I have here my notes from the December meeting. So there was quite a bit of discussion and not a lot of agreement on this, but as I recall, we did actually already take the hydro, correct?
No, you actually, sorry, I did miss connecting that last meeting. You actually said you would be okay taking both and actually asked if we would see if we could sell the nuclear. I'm sorry, I missed, that's an important point. We have reached out to several of our counterparty CCAs, and pretty much all of those who have already rejected the allocation, a few, they didn't want it. Those who have accepted the allocation, for example, some of our surrounding communities, including San Jose Clean Energy and Monterey Bay Clean Power, have both accepted the allocation. They both have said they don't want to take any more than their allocated amount. So we did attempt to lay off some of this power, but those who are accepting it only want their allocation and nothing more.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I do recall that I was in favor at the time of trying to sell it. I'm maybe leaning a different way given the impact that would have over the course of 5 years to our bottom line. I just wanted to clarify also that this would change our Green Start PCL, so it would not impact, as I understand it, it would not alter the PCL for the Green Prime because we use RPS sources. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so this would really just add, for a Green Start, it would be, as I see it, roughly about 48% RPS, about 40% hydro, and 12% nuclear.
Yes.
And as you say, it's for, how shall we say this? It's a bone that PG&E is throwing at us because there's a recognized issue in another area and they don't have an answer yet because the working groups haven't completed their work. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are heading towards this concept of allocating the value to us. And they were unable, the PUC was unable to determine how to value it. It's one thing to value renewable energy. You can look at the prices at which it transacts, etc. There are markets for that. They were finding it difficult to value greenhouse gas attributes. So they just made it zero. They made it worthless. And one of the arguments is that we know it's not worthless. The only wrong answer could be zero. But that's what they came up with. So in recognition, they knew zero is wrong, but they didn't know what the right number was. So it was, hey, we're going to set up these working groups to basically figure out a way of getting that value to you folks who are paying for it. And so this is the interim solution. You characterize it as throwing a bone, but it's the writings on the wall that that value should be transferred to customers who are paying for it.
Okay, so throwing a bone isn't quite the right word, but I do, to Director Elahi's comment earlier, this is very complex. And I think feelings about nuclear are very complex. But given how I think that your presentation is much more crisp, and I think I better understand the trade-offs. So I appreciate the explanation very, very much, and think that it's clarifies the policy decision in a different way, then I think that maybe will help us make a decision tonight. So I appreciate that.
It is much more focused and refined than last time.
Yeah, it's simpler.
Yes. So let's do Javed and then Margaret.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess everything we're touching today is a juggling act in a way. I mean, nuclear is obviously a concern for all of us. Are we actually getting any energy from the Diablo Canyon out of this deal? Or is it just a sticker label that changes?
The latter, it's purely a sticker label, whether we take it or not. These hydroelectric plants and nuclear plant will operate exactly the way PG&E decides how to operate them. And the nuclear plant will be shut down. Half of it will be shut down in the year 2024. The other half of the plant will be shut down in the year 2025, at which point the state of California will not have any more nuclear power.
And as far as how they allocate 12% to us compared to what they're allocating somebody else, there was some kind of a formula that resulted in us getting a 12% attribute?
It's a load ratio share. It's just what percentage of the whole PG&E load we were. So it's just weighted by the volume of energy that our customers have consumed.
And you only asked for it through 2020. You expect this to go through till Diablo shuts down? You
No,
come back for next year, or how do you propose?
Yes, I expect to come back to you in the latter half of this year once the PUC has resolved how they're going to deal with the 2021 and future allocation. They're working on it right now. We've been working on it for the last little more than a year. There've been working groups, there've been filings, and there's a lot of lots of lawyers, lots of staff all over California involved, but that will get teed up only at the end of the year.
So your estimate is that at least for this year, there'll be a $2 to $3 million saving. Next year could be more or less?
More. See, because this is only a partial year, if we have exactly the same deal that gets approved for next year, it'll be in the order of 5 million. And so through the time Diablo closes, we could be garnering close to 20 million. And that's also contextual given where we are right now. What do we want to use the money for? Whether it's for strengthening our reserves or customer relief programs or decarbonization programs. I think to meet our mission, we will have a lot more leverage in having this in our reserves to meet our mission.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Great. Thank you, Javed. Margaret and then Rob.
Thank you. And thank you for the explanation. It definitely was much clearer and easier for me to comprehend. The one question I had, and it's tied to, again, the longer term. So whatever is decided later on, will that be for the remaining 4 years, or is it a year-by-year decision that's made?
It's a good question. Those are not all resolved yet, because literally some of the ideas, and it's not just these GHG resources that we're talking about. The longer term has resource adequacy, a local RA, which we've been talking. We have, PG&E has some local RA resources that could be allocated to us. They have RPS resources that could be allocated to us. And they have system RA also. So each one of these, we have working group 3, the so-called, we said the PUC had set up these 3 working groups. Working group 3 is led by CalCCA, a direct access provider in Southern California, Edison. And they have different rules for each one of those allocations. In some of those, it's a mandatory allocation. In some, you get to choose annually. But I'm getting into the weeds here, but it depends. And that's why it's so many moving parts to that was the appeal to the PUC, saying, at least this GHG-free allocation, that's simple. There's no real big argument about it. Let's get that done while we are struggling over the big picture. So that's a TBD, Margaret.
Okay. But the GHG allocation longer term is a part of that bigger.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
Great. Okay, so moving right along, Rob?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, question for Girish. So the way you've described it, it makes me think that really what we also, well, in addition, what we're trying to do is prove the value of it. You said they've assigned a value of 0, so our PCIA is larger. If we help to show that there is a value to these attributes by actually taking them, or if we don't take them, that proves the other way that there isn't a value to it. But it seems to me long-term, 2 years, as soon as possible, we really want to get to a smaller PCIA and not have to be taking attributes. And so the question really is around, am I thinking about this correctly? Does this help to prove there's value to these allocations? And in fact, once we take it, we can probably show how much money we've saved, which helps for the argument that it has value and our PCIA should be smaller in the future rather than getting this allocation. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think the proof is going to be in our contributions to reserves, the fact that we'll avoid buying more basically greenhouse gas energy from the market. That's going to improve our financial situation. I think to prove value, there are ways of doing it, right? Just like you can show what is the value of RPS energy. Today, RPS energy is trading at the Brown Index plus about somewhere between $16 to $19 a megawatt hour. And how do you know that? Because you survey the market and you survey sellers and buyers to see what they are selling and buying these products at. Similarly, we do it with resource adequacy products. This is going to continue to be more transparent. So I think having some kind of carbon price, the problem is they're not all the same. So those definitions haven't been developed yet. But there's no doubt that when our financials change, that is a form of proof. As far as the second part of your question on PCIA being smaller, if they have a value allocated to it, yes, that's what will make the PCIA smaller. But that's not what is being discussed at the PUC. All the discussions are around allocating it to the customers who are paying for it already. But then I'll just leave it one last point. The PCIA is expected to come down in the years 2024 and 25 when Diablo Canyon is removed from PG&E's portfolio. It is probably the largest contributor. So from when we talked about the 4.2 cents or so, which is where we think the PCIA is going to go to, about 1.2 cents is Diablo Canyon. So Diablo Canyon is a big piece of it. So in the long run, post 25, we're going to have the PCIA coming down.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Liz?
I will offer this. I was trying to explain this or ask someone their opinion on this. And now that we're in the isolation that we're in, this seemed like a good example. We're all home trying to learn how to cook and be excellent cooks and bakers now. And if somebody wanted to make a creme brulee, you need egg yolks. And you use all the egg yolks and make this wonderful creme brulee. But then what do you do with the egg whites? You make an angel food cake. So I look at this as the attributes are the egg whites. And we're getting full value at low calories compared to, low value compared to the creme brulee, which is very high in calories. Anyway, that's how I ended up explaining it.
And with
Good.
that,
Thank you.
is there anyone else who has a comment before I go to the public? Okay, let me go to the public, see who we have. So we have James Talea. James, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. James Talea, Sunnyvale and carbon-free Silicon Valley. I wanted to express my support for the staff recommendation to accept the allocations for both large hydro and nuclear. There's, you know, it is as Girish described. I mean, one other thing I'll say about my background is I worked at PG&E for about 8 years in customer energy programs, and was there when they decided to not pursue renewing their license on the nuclear plants. So the reason that they're not that they will end on 2024 and 2025 and not by any means be extended due to anything that we might do is because the licenses at the federal level expire, and PG&E doesn't want to pursue the costs of those renewals. It's just way too expensive. So all we're doing here is contributing more dollars to the budget to be able to do the hard work ahead of us for decarbonization programs. It's going to take a lot of time and energy and money to do, and so why pay twice for things and leave the budget less than it could be? So I strongly support this effort. I certainly understand any board members that don't want any, you know, perception of connection to nuclear. That I can see, you know, anything there where someone might not be comfortable with that. But in general, you know, that I would strongly support the staff recommendation.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, James. I see no other attendees who've raised their hand to speak on this item. Let me go to the city or to our agency clerk and see if she has any items.
Yes, Chair, we did receive a written comment. This is from Bruce Carney, and for the record, I will read his comment. My name is Bruce Carney. My comments are my personal opinion, and I am not speaking on behalf of any group. I support staff recommendation alternative 1 to take both the hydro and nuclear carbon-free allocation. We are all aware that sometimes nuclear power plants cause devastating environmental damage. So too has climate change. We hardly need look farther than Australia to understand the magnitude of the damage that fires across the country have done in one single year. Though fewer human lives were lost in those fires than at Chernobyl, in my opinion, the total environmental devastation was far greater in Australia than in Chernobyl. Off Australia's east coast, the magnificent Great Barrier Reef is dying. The fires and the bleaching are taking place in a world that is only 1 degree C warmer than pre-industrial averages. What will happen in the not so distant future when temperatures rise another degree, or 2, or 3? SVCE is the source of most of the leadership and funding in our area for the most vital human endeavor or the 21st century, namely bending the carbon curve. The more funding that SVCE has for programs, the faster the curve can be bent. So much needs to be done and done quickly that I believe it would be a mistake to pursue any course other than alternative 1. Thank you very much for your attention. And that concludes the comment from Bruce Carney.
Okay, I see no other members of the public online that wish to speak. And back to the clerk, are you aware of any other communications?
No additional comments.
Okay, none at this point. So we'll close the public comment, and then we have Gerard, Javed and Nisa who want to say something.
Thank you. I think this is a difficult discussion, but it looks like we have funds that we can use for other sources. And I think, as Bruce pointed out, we can apply the funds we save from this to other necessary things that we need to do. You know, there's the EV program and there's the other programs Silicon Valley has. So I would move to adopt the staff recommendation as to alternate 1 and take the allocation.
Second.
Okay, who made the second?
Nancy.
Nancy. So we have a motion from Javed and a second from Nancy. And then I have two more people who wish to speak right now. Nisa, followed by Vaughn.
Thanks, Howard. I guess my question may be for Greg. Since it's obvious that any reservation, at least one of the reservations some board members may have, is the perception of nuclear. I'm curious whether or not on the labeling for something like this, we could add footnotes. I know in my other world, for example, on data sheets and config sheets, we substantiate, but then we can always explain exactly, the additional information that we think will help the consumer to clarify certain statements. For example, on our labeling, in this situation, can we clarify that we're not actually using it? Like, does it allow for that in this area?
Oops.
You're muted, Greg.
You were muted.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm not sure what the actual requirements on the power content label are. Now, clearly on our website, we could note that and explain it. Garish, do you know if there's any flexibility there with how it is shown on the power label?
Yeah, we can add a sentence or so in the website and in the power content label, something to the effect that we don't directly source nuclear energy. This comes to us as an environmental attribute associated with an allocation of PG&E's, the above market cost that we are paying. We could do something
and
like
I would
that.
even, so Garish, I would definitely recommend and support doing that. And I would actually even try to put it in more layperson terms.
Yep.
To really explain.
We will figure out a way to add it to the narrative that accompanies the power content label to the maximum extent we can, given the space limitations. The website allows us a little bit more leeway.
Good. So Yvonne?
Thank you, Howard. Nisa, I really appreciate that suggestion because I think it kind of helps solidify what I think the conflict that many people are looking at, of course, not wanting the perception that we're encouraging nuclear, but also understanding the realization that we have paid for it and that we're not using it. And so I too will support it, but I just thought that was a really great additive that you just suggested right now. So thank you.
Okay, great. Nancy?
Yeah, I'll speak to my second. I voted against taking it last time, but after the clarification here about the background behind what's happening with the it's basically, to me, kind of an accounting thing, and I do appreciate the suggestion to explain that it's an attribute and not a source of nuclear power that we're using. So that has put me in the support column. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have any comments on this item? My quick closing remarks are, like everything we do, it's a balancing act, and there's a certain amount of juggling and footnotes apparently that we'll have to put out there. But the economics of this situation, I think, are the right answer for our customers. And again, we are not causing more nuclear to be built in the world. We're just getting credit for what they're already doing. And with that, I will look to our clerk for a roll call vote, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith,
Aye.
Gibbons,
Aye.
Sinks,
Aye.
Liger,
Yes.
Tyson,
Yes.
Rennie,
Aye.
Montano,
Aye.
Elahi,
Aye.
Martinez Beltran,
Aye.
thank you. Abe Koga,
Aye.
thank you. The motion carries.
We can't hear you, Howard.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for reminding me, and thank everybody for that vote. And next year, we'll be getting to vote on this sort of thing again. So we're going to move right along to something that hopefully is a little more straightforward, which is a power purchase agreement for Rabbit Bush Solar. I think Monica is going to do this for us.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So just to recap, I've been in front of you a few times now. SBCE, along with Monterey Bay Community Power, issued an RFO for offers to sell us RPS, or Renewable Portfolio Standard Resources, back in 2019. Initially, we had targeted about 10% of our needs to be met through that RFP, but we've since increased it to closer to 20%. All of the resources that we sought through that RFP were required to be RPS eligible, PCC1, and also had to help us meet our long-term procurement mandates, starting with compliance period number 4. We were technology agnostic. In fact, we were trying to get a diversity of types of resources. Specifically, we were looking for ones that could supplement or that is complement our solar plus storage that we had already acquired, plus our wind resources. So we've been at this since April of 2019. Late in the summer, we shortlisted 6 different developers, and we've been negotiating PPAs since then. You can go to the next slide, Andrea. So the 6 projects that we've been negotiating, 3 of them, or 2 of them have been approved by the board already. So 2 geothermal resources approved in January and February of this year. Tonight's project is the Rabbit Brush Solar plus storage resource. And then we have 3 others that we're negotiating. Next slide, Andrea. So just to summarize the Rabbit Brush contract, again, it is a PCC1 resource. It is for new solar with battery storage. The term would be 15 years, starting in June 2022, extending through June 2037. The location of the project is Kern County. Our share of the project would be 40 megawatts of solar PV with 8 megawatts of battery. Monterey would be taking an additional, or the other 60 megawatts of solar, and then 12 megawatts of battery. This is expected, the project would meet about 3% of our retail load on an annual basis. And the contract is structured as 2 components. One is a fixed price for the PV. It has no escalator. And then the second part is a capacity payment for the battery, and that's in dollars per kW a month. Next page. So if you were to approve this PPA tonight, the First Solar Rabbit Brush PPA, it would help us get to our long-term procurement requirements. We currently have a RPS that is an annual RPS, but in terms of compliance, we're required to demonstrate over a compliance period. And so that first compliance period is compliance period number 4 that we're talking about. It starts in 2021 and goes through 2024. If you look at that period, we basically have a 40% RPS. And of that 40% RPS, 65% of it must come from long-term resources of 10 years or greater. Thus, the long-term procurement mandate for compliance period 4 is 26%. We are currently at 29% with the contracts that we've executed through this RFO and the previous RFO that we did in 2017. And this particular project would get us to 31% starting in compliance period number 4. And then you could see what it does in compliance period 5 and 6. Overall, if we are to execute all 6 PPAs, we would be bringing an additional 25% RPS to our long-term portfolio, or to our portfolio as RPS resources. In addition to the Rabbit Brush, I think I mentioned that we're negotiating 3 other solar plus storage resources. Those we hope to bring to you in no later than June 2020. We've already been talking to the developers for those particular resources that if we don't have a final negotiation by June of 2020 or a final PPA for consideration by our respective boards by June of 2020, we're likely to end discussions, and we're in the process of issuing a new RFO. So with that, this is our request that you authorize the CEO to execute power purchase agreement with Rabbit Brush Solar in substantial form, along with any necessary ancillary agreements and documents. Again, this is for 40 megawatts of solar, along with 8 megawatts of battery, qualifying as a PCC1 for 15-year term starting June 30th, 2022, for amount not to exceed $64,323,500. That's all I have.
That's it. So is there anyone who has any questions on this item or a motion?
I'll make the motion. So moved. That not to exceed amount is interesting.
Wait, hang on. Wait, hang on. Sorry. Don't we need to have public comment first?
I can do that after I get the motion.
Oh, you can. Okay. Then I'll second.
Nobody was making a comment, so it was like we needed something. So we have a motion and a second. It doesn't appear as though there's a lot of controversy on this, but let me go to the public. Is there any member of the public who wishes to make a comment on this item? I am seeing none in the online forum. Let me check with our clerk. Is there any public comment that you are aware of?
No, I'm confirming there is no additional public comment.
Okay, so we've closed the public comment, and we do have a motion on the table which reflects the staff recommendation and a second by Nancy. Is there any other discussion by anybody? Seeing none, let me just thank staff because this is a never-ending process, it appears.
Sorry, Javed has his hand up.
Oh, yep. Wait, your background's fading in and out. Your hand disappeared at a certain moment. Please, Javed, unmute.
We can't hear you.
Javed, please unmute.
Got it. What I was going to say is, I guess the number is interesting. It's a $64 million question that's been posted. The chart that was shown, there was a couple of geothermal resources that added up to about 10 or 11% of the resources. Are those the ones that we are going to be they're doing the force majeure in? Are those the same ones?
One of them is.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's, yeah.
And which one is that? The 1%?
So actually, we should not, sorry, I should not have spoken about that because we spoke about this in closed session.
All right, question withdrawn.
Those two geothermal projects were previously approved by us. And I would just say all projects in the world have their constraints and their issues with COVID-19. And that's probably all we should say. And it's good that we have the geothermal. That's a good balance. Other comments or questions? Let me go back to thanking staff for their tireless effort to turn up renewable resources for us. And we know that you're getting ready to go back out for another RFO, and we'll go through the whole process again. It is a lot of work to narrow down the tens and dozens of proposals to ones that look viable, and then to go through long and arduous negotiations to actually get one that can come to us, the board, to decide if we want to approve it. So I just want to thank staff and all those involved with this. And with that, I will look to our clerk and we will get a roll call vote, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith,
Aye.
Gibbons,
Aye.
Sinks,
Aye.
Flagger,
Yes.
Tyson,
Yes.
Rennie,
Aye.
Montano,
Aye.
thank you. Elahi,
Aye.
Martinez Beltran,
Aye.
Abe Koga.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries.
All right, that was good. Moving right along, we are up to board member announcements and direction for future agenda items. Does anybody have any announcements to make? I will announce that there are no social events in Saratoga this month. Okay, and with that, I want to thank everybody. Oh, Liz.
Thank you. I was almost going to do jumping jacks. Other people's stories got lost. My analogy of the egg yolk and egg white didn't. I thought it was a pretty good one, but all right. So one is, I think staff is providing notes to councils. I found them very helpful, and I think a lot of things came about at this meeting that would be useful at our next council meetings, if that's possible.
We are meeting after this meeting to finalize it. A draft has been prepared already. It'll be in your inboxes tonight.
Oh, well, you can go home and get some sleep. Thank you.
Andrea never sleeps.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because I wanted to make all staff obviously has been working really hard and dealing with all the constraints of the way we're working and living these days. But I know Andrea and Nick went above board to make this meeting happen as effectively and efficiently as possible. And I just wanted to say a particular thanks to the ones in the background that are needed for the support for the rest of us. So thank you, Andrea and Nick.
Very welcome. Thank you.
And Lisa, who's behind the scenes as a backup to everybody.
Yay, Lisa.
Okay, Rod?
Thank you very much. I will second that, and also wanted to recognize you, Howard. I know you were at a certain VTA meeting, what was it, last week?
Yes.
And if you haven't read the reports about it, the meeting was Zoom bombed, and it went on for the better part of a minute or so.
It was a very uncomfortable minute.
Yes, and so I know in preparation for this meeting, staff was on top of this, led by our chair. So I would like to recognize you, Howard. I tried to come in as my Corona, and you shunted me and blocked me every time. So I just want to recognize this agency. We are, in contrast to maybe some others, competent in every way. So sorry.
And just so everybody knows, before the VTA meeting even finished, I wrote up the notes on how it happened at VTA and how we could prevent it. And
well, I took all that information that you had and my city staff had on doing this better and well, and also have applied it to the Air District. So I really, really appreciate how we've made this go. My second comment is, I think that in times of crisis, there's some real opportunity for leadership. And, our county has been exemplary among counties in the country. And I think, everybody in the region has pitched in to flatten our curve. And I think results are becoming clear that we've taken a leadership role, despite all of the tragic consequences that this all has. I would say, though, that as we look at the problems looming on the horizon, these PSPSs and shutoff events are a big deal. And there is a move afoot. The things going on in the legislature will push towards resiliency in the local grid. I hope, and I've sent this message to the Air District staff. We have a committee at the Cities Association as well, looking at grid resiliency. I think, if our various agencies band together to offer solutions to this problem that don't look like putting a bunch of fossil fuel powered, air polluting powered plants up and down our communities, we'll have a long-term better future. So I just wanted to offer my appreciation to staff for their continued leadership on this. And I hope that some of the monies that we've talked about tonight find their way toward these resiliency projects, because I think we have an opportunity to lead in this time of crisis. It's clear that nature doesn't pick, and we have to accommodate what works, and we must make progress on climate and learn through this. So that's my comment. Thank you.
So now that Los Angeles and San Francisco have the cleanest air in the United States, what's left for the Air District?
That's right. We can just go home and celebrate.
Nancy.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I would like to point out that 3 of our board members were featured on the cover of the California Aggregator, which is the CalCCA newsletter. So I would like to ask staff to forward that on to the members of the board. And it's a nice picture, actually. It's in the fire station in Milpitas, so nicely done. No, Fremont, I guess it is. And then I would also like to announce that CalCCA has a webinar, because we all love webinars these days, on April 24th regarding a microgrid projects throughout the state. So they're featuring a couple of other areas microgrid projects for, I believe it's the California Redwood Coast Humboldt County Airport microgrid. So if you're interested in that, it's maybe a good way to learn what other regions are doing. So that was it. Thank you. And maybe I would ask staff to forward that too.
Yeah, both good. Any
We'll
other
do that.
comments? Okay, I want to thank everybody for their, Yvonne, go ahead.
Thanks, Howard. I'm sorry, there's a little background. I've got small children and it's way past bedtime. So I wanted to share with the board that I was able to go. SBCE sent me to the Hispanics in Energy Summit in DC in February, and I was not able to go to our last board meeting because we had our State of the City and then COVID hit. And so I just wanted to give you a quick synopsis of what happened there. I was able to meet one of the public utility commissioners, and some of the topics that they talked about was really understanding how to involve Latinos in this energy movement. And I found it very fascinating. So lots of talk about working with the Hispanic Chambers of Commerce to partner and plug people, and understanding how to identify and bring them into this movement. They talked about the generation plants to solar energy and how it's going to take 1 million houses with solar to replace just one nuclear plant. And so, of course, we'll have to also replace the coal plants, and just thinking about how we overcome those communication barriers in real time to see how we can communicate with kind of all the households, and make sure that we're managing that power distribution and that we're touching all of the communities. So, how we move to electrification is also very important, and looking at the poorest of the poor aren't always buying the Telsas, and really rely on the public transportation that we have in place. And so focusing kind of on those as well. Some of the demographics they talked about was in 2024, Latinos will become the minority majority in the US. They also talked about ways to bring them into the energy fold. It would be equity and energy initiatives that look at innovation and workforce partnerships, increasing the interest and access through education programs, trying to include diversity in our suppliers, and tech assistance as well, building and increasing that. And then, of course, making energy more affordable. That was really some of the biggest takeaways that I got from there. There was lots of focus on education and reaching out. 1 in 4 students that are Latinos are 1 in 4 of the students in our elementary schools are Latinos. 26% of high school students were Latino, and that will go to 35% in 2035. And so trying to figure out, how that will capture I guess really kind of capture the minds of how we look at reducing our carbon footprint and how we need to change that approach. And then finally, they talked about the buying power, and that the Latino market has a $1.1 trillion buying power. 1.4 trillion of the GDP was Latinas. They were the 11th largest economy in the world. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Most of the entrepreneurs that they are seeing now are coming from Latinas within the Latino demographic. So that's my report. I thank you very much for the opportunity. It was fascinating, and that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you for representing us. Okay, is there anybody else who wishes to speak? I'll pause this time and double check. Okay, I want to just thank everybody for their indulgence and support as I worked my way through managing this meeting. It's harder than doing it in person, and I appreciate that everybody was good sports and reminded me when I forgot to turn on the mic. So we will get better at this as time goes on. And with that, I think we're just going to call this meeting adjourned.